I know some of you are still popping on. We are recording this meeting. This is a palliative care series. We can do hard things together. This is part 4 of 4. And we're excited to have Dr. Shelley Garoni today from Kaiser Permanente talk to us about, hospice and, late stage and what happens at the active end of life. And talk about a little bit of, some of the support resources and things that are out there, things to think about. We will open up for questions and discussion after the presentation as well. But if you have any questions, burning questions or comments prior, please put them in the chat. We are monitoring that as well. And my name is Lisa Mooney, and I'm the Huntington social worker for Northern California and here at UC Davis. And it's an honor for me to do this program, and I can't believe we're already done on our final one, part 4. It's been such a great honor to work with all these people and bring this to you. So I hope you guys have enjoyed it as much as we've enjoyed providing it for you. And I'm going to have Mara and Jocelyn introduce themselves, and then we'll have Dr. Gurney introduce herself as well.
Go, Jocelyn.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Zhao. It's nice to see some familiar faces and then I think new ones as well. I am one of the palliative care providers and also a movement disorders neurologist at Stanford. And I've been so lucky to be collaborating with Lisa and Mara and Dr. Garoni on tonight's talk. It's lovely to see everyone here.
And I am Mara Sifri. I am genetic counselor coordinator for the Huntington's disease program at Kaiser Permanente. And I also work at UC Davis with Lisa as the genetic counselor for that program. And it has been an honor to work on these webinars we've been doing with Dr. Zhao so far. And I'm super excited to hear Dr. Garoni's talk before. I've heard a version of this in the past and it was awesome. So hopefully we're in for a treat.
We absolutely are. Dr. Gurney, you want to introduce yourself?
You're in for a treat. I agree. Absolutely. 100%. It is lovely. It is lovely to spend the evening with all of you. I'm truly honored to be invited to this auspicious group. And for the attendees, your histories and your stories are not known to me. I have no problem having open dialogue as we're going through. So if we need to chat in the process, we'll chat in the process. That's totally fine. I will start by saying that I always bow to my folks who have to live with illness, either in their own body or in the body of someone they love. So whether you are playing the role of patient or caregiver, I bow to you. I think healthcare workers could learn a lot if we would just watch the people that we work with to say, how do you do it? And can I be as brave as you are? Are we ready to jump in? Lisa, I'm going to take that as a yes.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I was muted. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. All right, let's go. So yeah, let's talk about the D word. And I'm wondering if you thought that I was going to say dignity, because honestly, we all live and we all die. That's an ODA statement. But what we find in healthcare is that physicians and healthcare workers aren't always trained well. So when I was in medical school, what I was told is sick people die. And that was the sum total of what I was told. That was it. And it turns out when you happen to be a doctor that finds yourself around dying patients, whether you like it or you don't like it, colleagues can be quite callous. And so I was always called the Black Cloud. And to just give you a little bit more about me, I love this Dilbert cartoon. This is an oldie but a goodie. It's over 20 years old now, with Dilbert saying, I'm well on my way to an early death from overworking. I expect a visit from the Grim Reaper any day. And the Grim Reaper shows up and Dilbert says, well, you don't look grim. And the Grim Reaper says, well, unlike you, I actually like my job. And when people find out my day job and that I work with folks who are terminally ill, 2 out of 3 will back away from me. I think it's like they're afraid that if they turn around, I can zap them from the back and somehow make them die. I can't. I don't have that power. And what I have found is that being able to be present with a patient and the circle that they call family when they are confronting terminal illness, when they are confronting dying, is actually incredibly rewarding work. And I would much rather do my job than deal with somebody who has to deal with the worried well or hangnails or whatever they all have to do. And you don't want me wielding sharp objects, hence I'm not a surgeon. I am going to start 2 stories for you, but I'm not going to finish them until the end of the talk. That is my lure, hoping that you'll stay with me through the talk. Bill is an 86-year-old gentleman. He has Parkinson's disease. So like Huntington's, he has a degenerative neurological disorder. I met him when he was admitted with pneumonia. He really was not doing well. We had given him antibiotics. We actually had moved him into the ICU. He was getting blood pressure medicine to try and drive his blood pressure up, in addition to the antibiotics and the fluids and high flow oxygen. And really, things were not going well for Bill. And I got called in late in the evening around 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night because the family thinks we should tell him that he's dying, but they're afraid to tell him. We're going to contrast Bill with Kathleen. Kathleen was a 16-year-old girl. I met her when she was living with stage 4 sarcoma, which is a bone cancer. Her cancer had started in her leg, but by the time I met her, had metastasized throughout her body. So every backbone, every vertebral body had cancer in it. And she had horrific pain. When I met her, she was awake and screaming on 900 milligrams an hour of morphine. That's a giant dose. Usually when we talk big doses of morphine, we're talking 20 to 30 milligrams an hour. This child was on 900. And I asked the doctor about her, and the doctor told me, oh, she has no exit clause. And I said, I don't think I know what that means. I'm just a lowly internist, and pediatricians are way smarter than me. What does it mean to have no exit clause? And the pediatrician said, oh, well, she's got this cancer, and yeah, it's ultimate, like terminal, but she's 16 and her organs are healthy. And unlike, the people you're used to dealing with who are 112 years old, her organs are going to go for a long time. So she may want to die, but her body can't die because she is young and otherwise healthy. So I'm going to let you ponder that while we talk a little bit. We're going to talk today about what normal dying does look like. I'm going to suggest some ways to cope, especially if you happen to be the loved one, not the one with the disease. And I will share with you some personal opinion. I will tell you from the get-go, this is the world according to Shelley. There is zero science backing me up, just a lot of years of observation. And I have learned that there probably is some power in the universe. I don't know what it's called, but I've learned that if I try and predict when someone's going to live and when someone's going to die, that power flips me the bird and makes them do exactly the opposite of what I predict, just to prove me wrong. And so that's okay. I know what my feet taste like. I'm pretty flexible. I can get them both in my mouth at the same time. But I do suspect that there is something larger in the universe than just the bag of bones and organs that we live with today. So let's talk about how humans do die naturally, because there's lots of unnatural ways that humans die. When we talk to folks and we ask them, how would you like to die? I will tell you that there's always a handful of people who say, I want to die in my sleep. And when I ask a little bit more about what they're telling me is, I want to be exactly who I've been. I want to have all of my function. I want to be completely independent. And then when it's time to die, I just want to go. I don't want to have any period of debility. I don't want any period of decline. I don't want any period of dependence. I just want to go. And my husband has a horrible joke about wanting to die in his sleep like his grandfather did, not like the other 3 in the car that Grandpa was driving. But we worry about this, right? And I will tell you, especially as a palliative care physician, that I meet patients who have been living with some kind of illness for some time, and there is still this magical thinking that I'm going to just wake up dead one day, and I don't have to make plans. I'm dealing with my father around this right now, and my father is still young and healthy. In my world, I don't let you call yourself old until 95. So by my definition, he's young and healthy, but we should probably have some plans. And he doesn't like talking about it because in his mind, he's going to be shot by a jealous lover's husband and he will just wake up dead one day. But what you'll notice is in the red font on this slide, 10 to 15% of Americans actually get to die suddenly. These Americans might be famous, like Sonny Bono used to be famous. I'm realizing how old I am now that I know him. But most of us don't get to die this way. These deaths are sudden, they are unexpected, they make the news, they get all of the drama because they are often traumatic. But most of us don't get this. So I'm sorry, if you wanted to go out this way, maybe you'll get to go out this way, but it's not something we can plan on. We need to plan on actually having to live through some degree of sickness. Now, I will tell you, if I had to choose a sickness of which I would die, I would choose cancer. 20 to 25% of Americans now are dying of stage 4 cancer. And the reason that I would choose cancer if I got to choose is because I continue to keep my function. So I am who I am used to being. I can wipe my tushy, I can pay my bills, I can do what I want to do around my house. I am Shelley, and you might have guessed I have a few control issues and I highly value my independence. The day that I can't wipe my own tushy, and it's not because these are in casts, I've warned my husband, he gets about 12 hours of that nonsense, and then I'm done. I don't want someone else taking care of me in such a very personal way. I can't deal with that. And when we think about how patients living with cancer die, they do this. They are completely functional. They are able to manage themselves. Yeah, they're getting a little bit tired. They can't shop for 4 hours at the mall anymore. They can only get one, or they go to mass and they have to take a nap. But they are who they are until the last week, usually, of their life. And then cancer is a vacuum of energy. It finally reaches a critical mass of energy loss. And the human that is living with that cancer is no longer able to be independent. One of my favorite patients of all time was a nurse at Kaiser Permanente. I joke that I have control issues, but she made me look just downright docile. And she lived alone until 36 hours prior to her death. And she was managing stairs and managing her house and managing everything about her life until 36 hours prior to her death. She was conscious in that 36th hour. She was unconscious 12 hours later and died in her sleep the next day. Cancer does that. Now, this feels incredibly fast to those who love that patient. So for the person who's living with cancer, this might, and like for me, might be ideal. I give you a little bit of time to get used to the idea that I'm checking out, and then bye-bye, honey, I'm out. But families who were not educated by us healthcare workers that this is how cancer goes are shocked. What do you mean now? They were fine last week. What are we talking about? How can death even be on the table? 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 Americans are dying of cancer, and it is something that I make sure folks understand. So as a palliative care doctor, ideally, I'm following patients for months to years before their death. And when I'm dealing with a cancer patient, as we can have this conversation, because these are emotional, tough conversations, but when we can have that conversation, this is the conversation I have. You will be fine until you're not. And then death is going to come, I expect, in your sleep fairly shortly when you're not fine. Now, some people tell me, oh, I would never want cancer. You're just cray-cray to even think that way. But, when I look at the alternatives, looking at organ failure is kind of rough, in my opinion. And when I think about organ failure, I'm thinking about heart failure, emphysema, kidney failure. you could argue that Huntington's is brain failure. And what we find with organ failure is that somebody is living with their disease, they get an exacerbation. So perhaps it's a patient with emphysema, they get pneumonia. They lose function. So they had been fine doing their stuff. They get pneumonia. They're weak as kittens. They can't do anything for themselves. They're super duper debilitated. But then they get their antibiotics and they recover. And then they're living their life again. What we find with this kind of disease trajectory, though, is they never recover to the place where they started. My grandmother died at 88 years of age. She died of emphysema. She insisted that she needed to keep smoking because it forced her to cough and clear her lungs. At that point, I figured, she's 88, why argue with her? But this is what she did. And every exacerbation, she would lose function. She was an avid golfer. And 5 years before her death, she was walking 18 holes of golf. 4 years before her death, she was walking 9 holes of golf. 3 years before her death, she was going to the driving range. 2 years before her death, she blamed the golf course for planting flowers that she was allergic to. That was not the case at all. She was just losing function. And in that last year before she died, she didn't go to the golf range at all. And she kept having these progressive exacerbations. And this disease course is also hard on caregivers because there's a sense of, how are you sick again? We just got you over this. Why are you acting up again? What's going on? Did you get discharged too soon? Did we not give you enough antibiotics? Did the doctors misdiagnose you? What's the problem that you're sick again? And we also in healthcare, I contend, don't warn our families we're going to get better than we are today, and we're not going to be as good as we were before today. So I started my life as a hospitalist, and I was the internist inside the hospital when you had the misfortune of getting admitted, and I was the one that took care of you. And it took me several years of my career to figure out I should probably warn people. You're gonna get better than you are today, but you will find that there is permanent loss. Whether it's stamina, endurance, strength, there is something that will permanently be gone and not come back. And the longer we live in your disease, we're going to see that your exacerbations come more often, they get harder. And for families, what's really difficult about this disease trajectory is the last exacerbation that causes death looks just like the one before. So again, what do you mean, doc, that you're talking about death? Why we were fine last time. He's going to be fine this time. These things, don't say that stuff. And you've probably figured out that physicians run away. As soon as people get crabby at us, we just like, oh, okay, and we run away. And we struggle to stay present with a family that is suffering in this kind of emotional reality that, yes, this exacerbation looks just like the last one. 1 in 4 to 1 in 5 Americans are dying this way. And this trajectory can take years. So again, my grandmother, we could watch her significant decline in that last 5 years of her life. But I will tell you that she had her COPD for well over a decade. She just denied that it was real. And of course, it had nothing to do with her smoking. The last trajectory that is our natural way of dying is dementia or frailty. And when I do this with folks that I can be in person with, we often find these visible groans and holy crap, can you guarantee me a cancer diagnosis so I don't have to live this one? Dementia and frailty are very difficult diseases to live, and I would contend dementia is the most dehumanizing of any illness that humans have to live through. I think that for me, when I watch patients living with Huntington's and when I think about their families, that loss of cognition is one of the most painful transitions that we have to watch and bear witness to. We know with dementia and frailty that physiologically, the process is the same. In a demented human, the cognition goes away. In a frail human, they quote unquote keep their marbles, they're sharp cognitively, but their body's falling apart. In both conditions, brain is disconnecting from body. And again, this might feel true and more true with Huntington's, but the brain is forgetting where are the feet in space. So we begin to watch the frail and the demented person fall down. What does a full bladder feel like? The frail or demented person becomes incontinent of both bladder and stool. How do I absorb calories? So we begin to see them grow skinny even though they're eating. They begin to get repeated infections because the brain can't direct that immune system and say, go to the lungs, go to the bladder. Ultimately, this human begins to forget how to swallow, and the brain disconnects from the swallow. And so we see that food is not going down well at all. This disease trajectory is so hard to watch for all humans who live with it. And because, especially in the case of dementia, that cognitive loss can be incremental, what I find, especially in adult children who are now caregiving demented parents, is this sense of, oh no, that's my mommy. And my mommy's, she's fine. She recognizes me. See, she recognizes me. I did a home visit this week, and I think that there was still a sense of that, oh, she's in there. She's fine. Because it's natural. When I look at this person who raised me, for me to continue to look at my father and see my father, not see a fragile human who can no longer speak for himself or make his own decisions. The other thing about this disease trajectory is this can last decades. So this is not a very fast disease course at all. My father-in-law had cardiac bypass surgery at 77 years of age. He was delirious as all hell the day after surgery. He was clearly confused 6 months after surgery and clearly demented 12 months after surgery. That puts him at age 78 by the time his dementia diagnosis is obvious. He died at 92. So the family had 15 years of watching this man progressively lose function and lose the ability to think for himself, act for himself, be himself, recognize himself. And it is incredibly painful. He was incredibly smart and very socially skilled. So even when he had no idea anymore who the people were that were running around him, if a young person ran through the living room and said, "Hey, Grandpa," he would look at that human and say, "That's a boy." And he called me Grandpa. And so his response would be, "Hey, grandson." And that's how he covered. He covered beautifully for a very long time. But this is incredibly difficult to watch. Today, 40% of Americans are dying with dementia and frailty. And that becomes something to think about as well, especially as we start watching what happens in healthcare and these bigger costs, not to mention that we're getting a whole bunch of executive decrees coming down this month that might change things as far as we know it. How does this relate to Huntington's? These are the only 4 disease trajectories known to cause natural death in humans. Again, there are some unnatural ways, but these are the natural causes. And I would suggest that Huntington's patients might see any one of them. More likely the dementia frailty, but we have had folks with Huntington's that have organ failure that we have to work our way through. I've seen a couple in my career that might have a cancer diagnosis, and you might have that rare sudden death. So it's important, I think, for you to understand how do bodies die naturally, because I want my families always to be as prepared as they can be. And I will talk with my families quite candidly. It is one thing to be cognitively prepared. I went to this seminar and Shelley spoke, and maybe I laughed and maybe I didn't. And then there's another thing to be emotionally prepared, and you cannot do that emotional work ahead of time. So if I can get my families cognitively ready to be thinking about, okay, there's a loss, there's a fun, and they said that wasn't going to come back. Okay, I've got some plans for that, but then there will be a day of sobbing, and that's normal. And so when I'm dealing with family and they're apologizing to me for crying, my response always is, I would hope that you are crying. It's the ones who don't cry that I worry about because something isn't quite resonating and helping them. I really like this quote by Isaac Asimov, life is pleasant, death is peaceful. It's that transition part that's kind of problematic. What I have found is humans are all driven by different purpose. I have some humans that are very spiritual. I have some humans that are very faith-filled. I have some humans that are very religious. I have some humans that are very agnostic, but very connected to the planet. I have some humans that feel like they are one with the universe and have celestial being as part of who they are. And what I've learned in my practice is that is who that human is, and that's okay. That's who they bring to the planet. But for all of us, as we have to confront our mortality, that whole piece of how do I get from one side of this equation to the other? How do I go from living to not living? Is there life after death? Did I do enough? Do I matter? Is there heaven? Do I get in? Those questions are pretty normal. And I would expect those questions to come up. And what I tell my families is if your loved one is dying or has a terminal illness and they're beginning to touch on their mortality, it's very normal for us who are not in terminal bodies yet to look at somebody and say, "Oh, don't speak of that. Oh, don't say that. That's not going to happen to you. Oh no, it's not time for that. We don't need to talk about that." But what I find is the human that has the terminal illness, when they begin to touch on these things, need to, because their spirit, and I call it spirit because I don't know what it is, but that essence of who they are, that essence of humanity, that spirit is feeling something around this transition. And if we don't let them speak their truth and ask their questions, they become lonely and isolated. And something then begins to shift for them that we ultimately can't keep pace with because we can't hear what it's like to be them. So I do want, as my patients are transitioning, for them to talk as much as they can. I'd like to talk a little bit about what, again, normal dying looks like. We talked about the disease course, what will go on the death certificate, but things to just watch for. In the last months of life, what we begin to see is that patients begin to disengage. The world is becoming smaller. So my extroverts who are out there just running headfirst into the world are not leaving the home anymore. My introverts who used to really reach out and connect with 2 or 3 friends are only connecting with 1, or they're not reaching out. Family get-togethers. We're watching people. I'll go, but only for a little bit of time. I'm not as engaged in the things that I used to like to read or watch. You might see some subtle loss of appetite or subtle intolerance. If you've got a loved one who is perhaps being fed through PEG or G-tube, we're beginning to see a little bit of intolerance. It's not huge, but maybe we're going from 5 cans to 4.5 cans in a day, and they're just bloating or they're belching, and you can tell we're not doing this. And there's a subtle onset of skinniness. It's subtle in the arms and in the legs. We're seeing that human sleep more. What I ask my families is just do a check-in. Are they just disengaging because their world is growing smaller, right? My body is getting sicker, or are they depressed? And I can't know that meeting a person for the first time. I always need my families to help me and understand, who is this human before? Who is this human now? Is this the same person who's just getting smaller? Now, I will tell you that the world physically gets smaller, but what I see is spirit grows. And when I was in college, they talked about how stars would implode and then explode. And that's what it feels like to me watching. The physical body, the physical expression of who that human is on the planet is shrinking, but the growth of that spirit, that connection to things that matter most, to what I love the most, that is growing. As a family member and you're watching a patient who's not eating as much, we're going to offer food to satiety rather than a calorie count. And especially if we're talking about artificial feeding through tubes, dietitians, God bless them, are all about the calorie count. And I'm always advising my families, don't care. If they're not hungry anymore, we're done. I don't force you to eat when you're not hungry. I'm not going to force him to eat when he's not hungry. We allow this person who's needing to sleep more to have that sleep. And we begin to come inside ourselves as the loved one to say, holy crap, is this real? Now what? Am I beginning to think? I spoke to one of my patients today, and he gave me permission to call his wife. And that was what she said to me. I'm starting to think about what I'm going to have to do when he's not here. And so they both have been feeling his mortality and not talking about it to each other. And that's okay in this very early recognition that things are changing. As we start getting closer to death, now we're in the weeks before death, and you're noticing that I'm not giving you numbers Because again, as soon as I put a number on somebody and say, you're going to live 3 more weeks, they're going to live 5 more weeks just to prove me wrong. But what we are seeing in the weeks before death, we're definitely seeing more fatigue. We're definitely seeing more sleep. We're definitely seeing loss of caloric intake. You can't hide from it anymore. We can't make excuses about it anymore. We're also seeing a decrease in the amount of fluid that our loved one is taking in. The skinniness is obvious and life feels small. So now maybe I'm not, in addition to not even going out of the house, maybe I'm kind of not even going out to the patio. Maybe I'm just hanging out in my bed or in my bed in my living room. As the family member, I'm going to ask that my family members really struggle to accept what's going on, to be able to say, I hate it. I hate that this is happening, and this is happening. So what can I do to continue to be present with my loved one, to hate the disease and not hate my human, right? Make most of the wakeful times and understand that energy is finite. So maybe there's something that you really want to do with identifying old pictures or creating memory. Spend the time, and we're going to spend the 30 minutes that I know you have good energy and I want to get this done or get a good piece of the work done. We're going to watch this human push food and fluid away, and that is such an anathema for the rest of human beings. We have spent our whole existence in our lifetime being fed when we were infants and feeding those that we love as we have our own children or we work with people around us that we love. Food is our currency to show that we love, and it is incredibly difficult when someone says, I'm not hungry, to figure out how to continue to be present in that human and to continue to take care of ourselves. So I will watch a beloved couple, and he's dying and he's no longer eating, and she stops eating too. And that doesn't help him. And that's what I tell my caregivers all the time. If I lose you, he's up a creek without a paddle. I need you. So it may be that all that's going in is milkshakes and water. I'm cool with that, but I do need some calories and some hydration coming in. So I need my caregivers to not let their own lives unnecessarily shrink. Life is becoming quieter, it's becoming smaller, it's becoming much more intimate with the spirit that is growing. But I also need my caregivers, if you are an avid gym goer, if you have to be out walking the dog every day and communing with nature to get yourself straight, I need you to keep doing that. And so that's important. I will be asking my caregivers, what are you doing to take care of yourself? And I will tell my patients point blank, you're my patient, and yes, I care about you. And once I know you're comfortable and we're cool with what's happening, I'm going to stop paying attention to you. And I'm going to turn to this human who's at your side and loves you, because I need that human to stay at your side and stay as healthy as they can. In the last days of life, our loved one is mostly asleep. They may still awaken and attempt to communicate, and that is also very normal. They may awaken and say things that make no sense. I had a patient when I was a hospitalist who was in her final days. She was mostly comatose, but every now and then she would wake up and say, the river, the river, the river. And I called her daughter and I said, did something happen to your mom at some point in her life about a river? And the daughter said, how do you know? Well, she's talking about it every time she's awake. And it turned out when she was 6 years old, the town she lived in flooded because the river overran the banks, and she lost friends during that time. So for me, her spirit was life reviewing, was back in that window of her life and being able to just articulate the words, the river. So if they awaken, we talk about whatever comes out for them. We're finding no tolerance of nutrition or hydration. We're down to sips and bites. Urine is quite dark. It can almost get to the color of coffee. Minimal output from the bowel. We're beginning to now watch things change color. So feet and hands may go from purple to white. The face is becoming more waxy. The skin is becoming more translucent. And again, to me, it's almost like spirit is growing, body is shrinking, spirit is light, body is dark. So we're beginning to see spirit shine through in that body. For those who are taking care of someone who is in the final days and hours before they die, if you can understand what they're saying, answer it. So if they ask you, am I dying? Answer the question. If they tell you, I see my mom, you say, great, what is she wearing? We don't argue that your mom is dead and she's not here. Just tell them, ask them to tell you what they see. It is okay to have tears and cry in front of our loved one because that proves that we love them. It may be a little harder to be wailing on our loved one saying, you can't, because that might stress them out a little bit. But we might need to have a moment. And it's okay to say, I need to have a moment right now. And we let ourselves have that moment. We offer moisture for the tongue. We offer special bites. I had a patient many years ago who was a winemaker. And so I had his son bring his wine and we used the little swabs from the hospital and we swabbed wine on his tongue because that's what he liked. And the nurses all wanted to share. Oh, okay, they were happy then too. We want to keep the environment calm. I want the cold parts of the body to be warmed up and I want the hot parts to be cooled down. I want the wet parts to be dried, right? You kind of get it. When we're in this time of life, we are watching the forehead. This is the most sensitive marker of human distress. That person may be awake, they may be asleep, they may just kind of be staring out into space. But if there is no grimacing in the forehead, they're fine. It doesn't matter what else is happening. If this is cool, they're cool, and we trust them. Those final hours, usually we are now in coma. So the medical term is coma. This is a sleep from which people do not waken. We might hear a rattle in the chest. We might hear some rare vocalizations. We might see facial movement still. I'm convinced that the spirit is in there and whatever comes next, that human is somehow connecting to. So you might see the face move like they're in some kind of engagement or communication. It's pretty common to see the breathing now have some pauses. And you might see that there's some very heavy breathing right before the moment of death. And we don't understand this. They don't let me kill people and bring them back and try and research how that happens. It almost feels to me like the spirit is birthing back to whatever it came from. So just as we have women breathing really hard and pushing hard to get babies born onto the planet, I think the spirit has to go through some kind of birthing to leave. And we see that we get very white around the nose and the mouth, but we may be purple down in fingers and toes. My caregivers, I need them to be okay with the sleep. I need them to trust in however they approach the world, whether they're religious or not, spiritual or not. I need them to trust that love doesn't die. Bodies die. Love does not die. And this human that is dying in front of them, they will always still be loved and remembered. If we're rattling, we use medicine to dry the rattle. If we're furrowing in the forehead, we're going to get medicines and calm that down because that human is distressed. And I'm going to ask my caregivers to take breaks. It is truly creepy to just stare at somebody who's sleeping. And what I have found is that as we get this close to death, the human that needs to die alone, the human that's been feisty and stubborn and independent and ornery their whole life, will probably not allow a loved one to watch the last breath. And that is protective. They don't want that to be the final memory. They want the memory to be the stubborn, feisty, independent who they had always been. So it's important as we are in this phase of life to give our dying loved one breaks so that they see we can walk away, we can take care of ourselves. If you need to take the last breath while I'm not here, it's okay. I give you permission to do that. We know death has occurred because there is no more movement of the chest. There's no more noise coming out of the mouth. If you put your ear onto the chest, you won't hear a heartbeat. The body looks different. And so when I'm teaching young doctors or medical students, what I ask them to picture is their house at night with the lights on, and then to picture their house with the lights off. A dead body is the same house, but the light is gone. And again, this is just the world according to Shelley. I say spirit has left, the light is gone, the house is there, and it's now dark. I have families that are very nervous about, well, we've got people that need to come, and we've got things to do, and we there's this essence of we've got to hurry. And so what I will say is, if we're in these final hours, as far as we know, again, I can't study it, so world according to Shelley, But as far as we know, the ears are the last things to turn off. So I ask my families, use a phone, call them, get them to talk. We can FaceTime now. If they're children, get them to write or color and get those pictures to the loved one and get them up around the room. This is really critical time to say everything that has never been said. So it may be that when you were 6 years old, you got a Barbie doll and you really wanted a Tonka truck and you were completely pissed off about the whole endeavor and you've carried it your whole life. This is the time now to say, I forgive you for giving me a Barbie doll when I wanted a Tonka truck. And it may feel completely stupid, but this is the time for spirit to heal. This is the time for the loved one as they're getting ready to leave this body. This is the time for the loved one who is having to say goodbye. And I never want my survivors to feel like if only I had. I never want my survivors to wish they had said something, done something, been something. This is the window to say all of that. And why it works, I don't know, but it works. I had a patient years ago. She was very secular. She was terrified of dying because she thought that there was probably life after death and that she didn't deserve to get it. I went to our hospital chaplain and I said, can you help me reach out to her to say that she does deserve it? She's got family that is racing here to be with her. If she was truly an awful person that didn't deserve a good afterlife, why would they do that? So I think she's worthy, but I don't know how to help her see this. And the chaplain came in the room with me and he tried really hard to stay very secular and speak about worth. And he couldn't hold it. He kind of lost himself in, will you accept Jesus Christ? And I felt bad. I'm like, oh, I brought this person that brought a thing that she doesn't believe. But it worked. She was unconscious. And by the time her family got there, all of the distress that she had been expressing was gone. She was okay. And she had been able to reconcile that whatever comes next, she truly was indeed worthy. So I trust that even if they're not conscious, your loved one is hearing you and that I need you to speak. I am absolutely convinced that our people choose that moment of death. Again, I don't know how this works, but I have zero control in how long somebody will live. This is a spirit story. One of my patients many years ago was a cantankerous old fool. I suspect when he was young, he was meaner than a junkyard dog. But as he had children of his own and grandchildren, he was adored. He had 25 people in that hospital on any given day of the week, adored this man. And he had gone unconscious on me. And so I was meeting with this family every day saying, you know, he's dying. I don't think we have much time. And they said, well, can't you wake him up and tell him? I'm like, I didn't make him go unconscious. If I did, yes, I'd wake him up. I think he's dying. I think that's why he's unconscious. And day 3, I'm walking through the unit and they come running out. Come in, come in, come in. And I go in, and after 3 days, this old fart is awake. And they're gathered all around the bedside. Dad, do you know how sick you are? And God, you'll have to forgive me. He used bad language. He looked at all of them around the bed. He looked at me. He looked at his son and he says, where the fuck have you been? Have you not been listening to her? She told you. And I was like, I had nothing to do with this. They choose the moment. He died the next day. And so I have had to just give in to, there is a power bigger than me. That moment is chosen when everyone in the family can be okay. And this is not, you're dying, I'm fine. This is, I'm sobbing, my heart is broken, and I can see that I will live tomorrow. That's what I mean when I say okay. There are some nuances, especially in the Huntington world. California has the End of Life Option Act. This is medical assistance in dying. This is for California residents. They must be over the age of 18. They must have a prognosis of less than 6 months. Where this gets wonky in the Huntington and the dementia world is you must be of sound mind within 6 months of your death, and you must be able to consent to treatment, and you must be able to administer the medicine yourself. So this becomes a little bit weird. I think that there will be patients in the Huntington world that would qualify for this option. It requires 2 visits with an attending physician. In Kaiser Permanente, those visits are by video. It requires a 3rd visit with a physician who's providing second opinion. The second opinion is confirming terminal nature, confirming prognosis, and confirming sound mind. That's all the second opinion is doing. At Kaiser Permanente, the cocktail is a powder that comes in a brown glass vial. The cocktail then is mixed with fluid and must be ingested fairly quickly because it becomes a slurry that then becomes kind of muddy and gross if you can't get it down quickly. Because it's a lethal cocktail, patients do have to take nausea medicine an hour before they plan to ingest. So there's some planning that goes with this. And some people say that that feels kind of weird. They don't really like it. I've had other patients though throw parties and drink their champagne and then drink their cocktail. And the medicine in most humans puts them to sleep within minutes. Death is expected to occur within minutes to hours. I have had patients live as long as 40 hours. So I want my end of life patients to be openly enrolled in hospice because I need someone to help take care of that sleeping body and to help pronounce the death after it occurs. The California law is very clear that if a member of California chooses to partake in this option, the cause of death is the terminal diagnosis. There is nothing about ingestion. There's nothing about medical suicide. None of that comes forward. Life insurance, if they have life insurance, is paid out based upon the terminal diagnosis. The families that I have had go through this process very much appreciate the ability to control and have some sense about, I'm not going to be dependent. I'm not going to put up with that pain. There's some sense of control in all of this. What we have found is that when you look at the sheer number of people who would qualify for the option, a very small fraction actually seek the option, and only about half of those will ultimately ingest. So it's out there, it's available. I find that it is not used that often. There are unspoken choices as well. So especially when I think about neurodegenerative disorders, it is okay to stop eating and drinking. And I have had patients who do that. And in the Huntington world in particular, I have had families where suicide was used. I had one mom and husband had Huntington's, he suicided. Elder son had Huntington's, he suicided. Younger son had Huntington's and died naturally. And it was interesting to talk to her about how those deaths impacted her. She could appreciate why her husband and her elder son suicided, but she was grateful that her younger son gave her time to be able to take care of him and love him back to what he came from, because she created him and she felt honored to be able to take care of him through his death. And so we have to think about that. I think about how our choices might impact others. At your last conversation, you chatted quite a bit about hospice. So just a quick reminder, hospice is a Medicare program for folks that are in the last 6 months of their life. Medicare understands that physicians absolutely 100% stink at our ability to guess how long you are going to live. We don't know. So Medicare lets us be wrong, and it's the only time Medicare lets physicians be wrong. So I'm pretty grateful about that. Medicare provides care in where you are living. Sacramento is, I think, ill advantage that we don't have inpatient hospice units. There's been attempts to try and get a hospice house open for homeless folks, but we don't have inpatient units otherwise. So the care is provided where you live. Nurses are coming in anywhere between 1 and 5 times a week. Bathing assistants can come in 3 days a week. Social workers are coming in at least every other week. Chaplains weekly if you wish. Volunteers weekly if you wish. We provide the equipment that you might need from a medical perspective. We provide the medicines to keep you comfortable, and we provide 24-hour phone support to help make sure that you can stay comfortable at home. Palliative care, what I do is for folks who are living with ultimately incurable illness to ask the question, if you're not dead yet, how do I help you live well? And that is how I introduce myself to patients. I get it that you're living with this thing and it's terrifying and it's awful and you're alive today. So how can we talk about how to help you live well? I'm very simplistic, and palliative care is how do I help you live well? Hospice is how do I help you die? I want to say just a couple of words about caregiver coping, and then I promise I'll finish our stories and shut up and let you ask your questions and make your commentary. Caregivers, I think, again, as I stated at the beginning, caregivers owe are deserving of so much respect. We owe you so much respect from the healthcare perspective because it is an incredibly difficult job to be a caregiver. And we can think about, when we take care of our kids when they're babies. Yes, you do, but you don't anticipate that you would have to spoon feed your baby as a 40-year-old adult. You don't anticipate that you would have to keep your 25-year-old daughter in diapers. You don't anticipate. So care might look the same, but it doesn't feel the same. And I want to be very clear with my caregivers that I recognize that. And so when my caregivers come to me with any myriad of emotion, anger, frustration, abject terror, feeling guilty, completely bewildered, overhead, I get it that I would expect any one of these emotions to be present for you somewhere in the journey of having to be a caregiver. Now, we can argue if I'm a patient, I'm going to go through this similar constellation of symptoms. But what my patients will tell me is they get it. Yeah, this sucks for me, and I'm not going to be here someday, and I'm kind of scared about that. But she has to live after I'm gone. She has to deal with the stuff that I used to do. And so my patients are usually very much in tune with the fact that this is harder on the caregiver than it is on the one who lives with the disease. And so I'm always checking in with my caregivers just to see how are we doing. And when I have somebody that might bite my head off, I have to check in and see if I deserved it because I might have deserved it. But even if I didn't deserve it, I'm going to be offering grace because something's going on and we need to find out what's happening. Is it that we didn't get enough support, that I can't get enough support because healthcare in this country isn't built the way I would want it to be built, to be offering different types of support and caregiving support at home? Is it just that all of a sudden this got real? My new consult this week said that, this is real now. It wasn't real, but now I'm sick. And now this is kind of real and it sucks. So I'm checking in with my caregivers, and then depending on what's coming up for them, I try and make offers. Usually I find folks like Ms. Mara and get social workers that are smarter than me to be helping my families, but there are some things that I have found, right? I have had patients and caregivers alike really very much struggling with forgiveness. One of my patients years ago, I heard him behind me telling his family, "I'm such a shit." And I turned around and I looked at him and I said, "Did you just call yourself a shit?" And he goes, "Well, yeah." I said, I get that you made choices that in retrospect probably are not the best choices you could have made. But you've got these lovely women here and a wife and a daughter who clearly adore you. And if you were truly a shit, I don't think they'd be here. So I'm gonna challenge your self-perception and say that I get the feeling that you're probably a pretty good guy who made some bad choices at one time. And I think you're forgiven for that. So really trying to work our way through what is it that's getting in the way of loving you fully and completely in this moment. Am I just so overwhelmed and I can't keep all of the jobs straight? Well, how do I get some help with that? Is there somebody else that can keep the notebook for me? Is there somebody else that can help coordinate things for me? Is there somebody else that can run the darn vacuum or put a toilet brush in and get things cleaned up for me because I have so much going on that I need to do? And I always ask my caregivers, what are we doing to care for you? Because again, if I lose my caregiver, my patient, everything falls apart for my patient. I've got to have my caregiver. So if I need to figure out breaks for my caregiver, chocolate for my caregiver, making sure that they're taking their own medicines, whatever I need to keep my caregiver together. So we'll finish our stories. Bill was our gentleman who had Parkinson's disease and neurodegenerative disorder similar to Huntington's. He had reached end stage. He was now unable to swallow. That's what caused his pneumonia. And the family noted that they had been watching in the months leading up to this hospitalization that the world was smaller. So in retrospect, they could see it. We weren't going out anymore. He was getting a little skinny. He was preferentially pushing food around his plate, and then they recognized, oh, it's because he could swallow it. So he was taking the things that he could swallow. They could see it. In retrospect, as they were telling me about him, they could see, oh yeah, there's been this decline. Bill had been very clear with his family from the time of diagnosis. I do not want to be kept alive artificially. I do not want tubes down my throat. I do not want tubes feeding me. I do not want you pumping on my chest to keep me alive. When it's my time to go, it's my time to go. So they were trying to honor that, but they were struggling because he'd been Bill. He'd been funny. He'd been up a little bit. He was still kind of Bill. So when I went into the ICU to meet him, it was 11 o'clock at night. And now they recognized, oh, Bill's dying. And they wanted him to know that he was dying, but they didn't know how to tell him. And so I was the covering doc. It was 11 o'clock at night. And the ICU said, hey, could you come down and tell Bill that he's dying? It's one of the more unusual requests I get at 11 o'clock at night. Sure, what the hell. So I go bopping on into the ICU and I introduce myself to the family. Bill is laying in the bed and he is white as the walls around me, but his eyes are open. And he has absolute, utter wonder. He's got a little smile on his face, and you can see him looking at the ceiling and just in awe of what he can see. And he's just looking around, and he's got his little quiver going on with his Parkinson's, and he's clearly dying, but he's okay. And so I walked up to him and I introduced myself and I said, Bill, can you tell me what you see? And he got this huge smile and he says, angels, and they're gorgeous. And I looked at his family and I said, I think he knows. I don't think I need to say anything else. I think we're good. And they were fine, as they could see that Bill saw angels. Bill was not afraid. They didn't have to be afraid. He died later during the night in his sleep, and they were fine. They were able to be able to give him a kiss and say, let's stay with the angels and just hold ourselves together here. Kathleen, on the other hand, was a different story. I met Kathleen on a Friday. I think the team called me because of her pain management more than anything else. Again, Kathleen was on 900 milligrams an hour of morphine. She was awake and screaming. When I went in to see Kathleen, it was very clear to me that she's dying. Now, there was that terrible movie many, many years ago about I see dead people. And that's not what I see, but I feel presence. So when I walk into a room, I can feel the energy in the room and I can tell if someone's dying. Kathleen was clearly dying. And so I went out to her doctor and I said, okay, I can get her pain under control. This is what I'd like to do. I'm going to change these medicines. Are you okay if I write orders? Can I do that? And the doc said, yeah, great, go for it. I said, so what's the plan for her dying? And that's when I got the, well, she has no exit clause. I think she's dying. And the doc's like, no. You go handle your little pain medicines and I'll be the doctor. Okay, whatever. So over the weekend, I went in every day. We got Kathleen comfortable. So by Monday morning, I had her on 90 milligrams an hour of methadone. She's now calm. She's now sedated, but not totally. She can come in and out. She can carry on a little bit of conversation. I get to the bedside around 8 o'clock in the morning, and the nurse says she's hallucinating. And I looked at her and I looked at the nurse and I said, well, what is she saying? And she said, oh, she's talking about turtles and people. But she's not hallucinating, she's dying. And she's seeing the other side. And so I called my chaplain and I said, hey, I'm going to need some help because Kathleen is 16 and she has the gall to have a cancer and she has the gall to be dying of her cancer. Her poor mother is just beside herself. Her mother cannot accept that Kathleen is dying. And her mom could say things like, well, of course she's got terminal cancer. But when you had to say, but she's dying now, mom was like, no. And so I knew that we were going to have a hard time. And so my thought was, let's have my chaplain meet Kathleen's dad and see if I can get Dad ready to midwife Kathleen into, I'm going to say heaven because I don't know what comes next. Can I get Dad accepting and understanding that Kathleen's dying, and then see how we do through the night? So at 3 o'clock that afternoon, I'm at the bedside with Mom. We're just making small talk because Mom cannot speak to the reality that is in front of her. Dad and the chaplain and the pediatrician are over in the corner, and they're talking about Kathleen's dying, and this is what it's going to feel like and what it's going to look like. And Dad, what questions can we answer for you? Kathleen's unconscious. So she's just laying there. Mom's chit-chatting, and we're chit-chatting and just making small talk. They're over there doing whatever they're doing in the corner. And all of a sudden, Kathleen opens her eyes and she goes, waving at the ceiling. And then she drops her hands down and she closes her eyes. And I'm looking at her going, that was cool. But there's silence. They're like, no, we're not going to address this. We're not going, no. So there's nothing that's said about it. And I'm like, but that was so cool. No, we're not going to talk about it. Okay. So Mom and I continue small talk. They continue doing whatever they're doing over in the corner. And the next thing I see, Kathleen opens her eyes again and she reaches up and grabs with her hand. And she holds it. And then she brings her hand down, closes her eyes, stays unconscious. Now Dad looks at me and he goes, what is she doing? I said, I think she's talking to the other side. I don't think we're alone here. I think whatever happens after we die, she's communing with that. And Dad said, huh, okay. And Mom kind of looked at me and said, what? I think she's dying. I really do. Mom said, yeah, no, she's going to prove you wrong. Okay. I know what my feet taste like. Good. She can prove me wrong. The next morning I got in, Kathleen had died at 11 o'clock the night before. And the doc came up to me and said, how did you know she was dying? I said, I don't know. I just do. And she goes, did you hear about her death? I said, no, I didn't hear about her death. And the doc said, so we finished up in the room about 4:30, 5 o'clock. And around 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, the room was full of people. Turns out Kathleen had 5 siblings. I didn't know this. And so there were 5 siblings, Mom, Dad, and then a handful and myriad of other adults that were somehow connected in her life. Kathleen opened her eyes. She'd been asleep. She opened her eyes and she looked at Mom and she said, Mommy, Aunt Isabel's here and she loves you. She just wants you to know that. And Mom looked at her and said, Aunt Isabel died 20 years ago. You've never met her. And she said, well, she's here and she loves you. And then a few minutes later, she looked at one of Dad's friends and she said, your daddy's here, but I can't say his name. And he looked at her and he said, my dad is dead. She goes, well, he's here and I can't say his name. And the man started crying and he said he spoke Tagalog. Kathleen named another 5 or 6 people who were dead and very clearly said, they're here and they love you. They're here and they love you. They're here and they love you. She named a whole list of people. And then she went unconscious again. The adults left. Mom and Dad were there with her siblings. And at 11, Kathleen took her last breath. Mom, as what you would expect, did not handle this well. So Mom immediately jumped on the bed, wanted to start CPR and wanted to start coding Kathleen. And interestingly enough, the siblings grabbed her and pulled her off the bed and said, Mom, she told you where she was going. She told you she's okay. And we need to honor that. We need to let her be and not do this to her. And Mom was able to, because those kids pulled her off the bed, Mom was able to do that. She had a few moments, right, where she had to kind of just let all of that emotion and abject terror out. But honestly, I saw Mom a year later at a celebration of life for our pediatric patients. And I went up to her and said, I don't know if you remember me. And she did. And I said, how are you? And she said, I'm okay. My kids are taking care of me. I'm taking care of my kids. It's not that we don't miss her. We miss her every single day, but I'm okay. So in the world according to Shelley, bodies die, spirits don't die, and love does not die. Hearts will break open. And if you are a caregiver, I fully expect your heart to break open. My job as your doctor is to keep it from breaking apart. And so I expect your heart to open. I expect you to grow. I expect you to be a different human. And survivors will tell me the world feels different. The world looks different. People that are happy piss me off. I expect that. That's normal. But I don't want your heart to break apart. I want you to be able to mend and become a better, bigger version of you. And I want that loved one that you took care of to move into your heart where it has broken open so that you always keep that love and that spirit with you. I am convinced that death occurs at a time that the loved one chooses. It's beyond my control by any stretch. And that you have purpose. So I have seen caregivers very often struggle with accepting and owning that they count, that they matter. You have purpose. We need you. Your loved one needs you. And we are so grateful that we have you. When all is said and done, I could be wrong. It's the world according to Shelley. It's what I've seen in the field. I can't say that I have any science to back me up. But I would welcome your comments and questions.
Thank you so much for that. That was awesome. And I just love the fact that you talk. I mean, this is a hard conversation, but you kind of made it seem okay to talk about and kind of easy to talk about. Not really easy, but you know what I mean? Like, just it's normal to talk about, which is why we're here today. And it looks like we have about, well, minus the 4 of us, so about 7 participants with us, and we are open to having questions. I don't see any in the chat right now, but if you want to unmute yourself, if you want to show your face on video, ask questions, comments, anything like that, we're happy to do that. And this is, we did this series for you guys, and we know this is a very hard topic, and it's not a topic that most people will have on a Tuesday evening at 7 p.m., but we're here for you and we want to support you in any way we can. And we have about, 20-ish more minutes. Does anyone have any comments, questions, concerns? Rita, can you unmute yourself for me, or do you want me to hit the button for you?
There, I did it.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, I was uncomfortable at first, I didn't feel anything, but then I was feeling like, wow, this is really heavy. And I've heard these kind of stories before, and now I'm so relieved and so feel lightweight, feel good. I feel encouraged. I feel really great. Thank you so much. You did a great job expressing, what you went through, and I really appreciate you communicated very well. Thank you so much. It's really helped me a whole lot.
Bless you, Miss Rita.
Does it feel a little less like daunting and scary, like how you were feeling at the beginning?
Well, I don't know if I was daunting and scared, but it's a mystery. And everybody has a different feeling about it and understanding and education about it and their own, what they've been through. But I'm really relieved, and I do believe that, not that there's just somebody, very definitely is. I just didn't know how to understand it, but I think I do now, because the most important thing is for us to love each other. And the world makes us the way we are. We listen to everything that's wrong and get all scared and frantic and all of that. And we really shouldn't be. And I was just thinking today, well, let's see, I guess I need some counseling because I can't control how I feel. And, letting myself get all messed up and heavy. But I don't feel that way now. I have hope. I know it's true. It happens to lots of people. Different people have lots of feelings about it, but I really do believe the way for me to handle it is to see how I can help myself and just love everyone as best I can. We're just people.
Thank you.
We shouldn't be fearful and let people make us feel a bad way. It's just I was thinking, well, how can I not feel bad? What can I do? But just hearing what's happened with different people, it's the truth. It must be the truth. And I choose to go that way. So thank you very much for having this program, Lisa.
You're very welcome. I didn't do it alone. But I'm so glad you found us here tonight and were able to join us. And that's exactly why we do it. You know, we want to have these discussions with people. And, you know, if you're feeling like something's not normal, it probably is just not something we talk about much. But here we can. Does anyone have anything else to talk about and mention? Daniela?
I know that I came late, but I would like to relate. I don't have this problem yet because my HD person, Andrew, he's in the middle towards late stage. But I would like to share a story from my backup caregiver. He's also, because he's part-time with us, he also took care of a 101-year-old. And he told me he witnessed his last few days in hospice. He was very, very fearful. I mean, this was a healthy person, former runner, you know, but he was 101. He couldn't sleep even with maximum Vicodin or whatever they gave him. He was very restless, like he was seeing things. I'm pretty sure some of the things that you discussed in this class. And I told Magic, look, go and tell the family, regardless of what their religious creed is, just call a pastor or somebody to give him his last rites, because then he's gonna be calm. I mean, I agree that the soul never dies. That's why it's so important how we live here on earth, because the soul is not dying. So anyway, I told him that, and then after a few days, Magic told me that he passed away peacefully, like immediately after the pastor left and gave him the last rites. Not all the religious traditions have all the mysteries and so on, but all the religious traditions, all the spiritual traditions, they have some kind of prayer and meditation for the end of life. Where you are asking God to please have mercy on this soul. You know, they are suffering, they are in pain, and so on and so forth. And this takes away that thing that took away this person's Paul's fear and everything. He fell asleep without any medication after that, and he passed away in his sleep peacefully. After almost 1 week of the doctors and so on, he was so fearful. And another thing I want to say, I don't have this experience, but I have experience with our dog that we had to put him down in December. And, you know, I didn't think that I was gonna have a broken heart from a dog. And I don't even want to to think about, even though I'm organizing the vintage house to take care of Andrew in there and probably have hospice at home. Anywhere you go, he's going to be broken heart, because this is what happened. I mean, any kind love always breaks your heart in some way or another. Well, anyway.
Miss Daniela. Miss
Gonna stop
Daniela,
my video.
you're reminding me, I think that issue of having some sort of acknowledgement in a spiritual way at the end of life, I think it does help with the dying. My father-in-law that I mentioned was 92, demented as a doorknob, the poor man, and had tried to die for years. So he would have these episodes where his heart would just stop and he'd collapse. And then it was almost like an old TV where you'd hit the side of the TV and he'd pop up and be like, "Hey, how are you?" And he had done this repeatedly. And so the family was to the point of like, "Well, is he dead yet?" No, like, so, well, as well. And that's how they handled these fainting episodes. And so we finally get to he's actually dying. And my poor husband kept telling the family, it's bad. He always has. So I kind of think he's dying this time. And the priest came in. The priest had given last rites to Joe no less than 6 times because they kept thinking that Joe was dying. And Joe kept, "Hey, how are you?" And so the priest came in and gave him last rites and then looked at him and said, "Joe, if you don't go this time, they're going to take the pillow to your face." And I looked at him and I said, "Oh my God, Butler, do this for a living?" I would never say that out. I might think it, but I'd never say that out loud. And the priest was just like, "Yeah, no, sometimes you just have to say this stuff." And honestly, my husband and my brother-in-law needed that extreme irreverence because they were feeling so guilty to be wishing Joe to be gone already because his body was so broken and it was so hard for them to watch him in this broken body, but they felt guilty saying, I just wish he could go. And to have a priest give them permission in such an irreverent way. Joe died that night. It was the same thing you were saying, Miss Daniela. He went that night and was able to just let everybody finally settle into, okay.
Yes, and peaceful, like my dog. I didn't want to take him to euthanize him, but he was almost 19-year-old and blind, and he couldn't eat and he couldn't stay on his hind legs. And everybody told me, not only the vet, he said, "Well, you know, this is the best thing you can do for this dog because the pain medications are not working." So yeah, it was hard, and like I said, I didn't think that I was going to be brokenhearted. I had to take, I took some homeopathics for grief in order to be able to function all the way to Christmas and after Christmas, because this is the most stressful time in my life during the holidays. But yeah, yeah, this spiritual dimension of passing, I think it's very important for the caregivers, for the family, and for the person who is passing. It's kind of prepare the soul for the transition to basically to the spiritual realm.
And it's a little comforting, at least for me, from my perspective of, HD takes so much away from those that we love that are living with Huntington's disease that it's comforting to know that there's a piece of them that hasn't deteriorated or changed due to Huntington's disease. I want to give Kay a chance to speak because she's raised her hand a couple times.
Oh yeah, I didn't want to interrupt because this is all really important stuff. Shelley, thank you so much for the talk. It was fantastic. My mom had Huntington's, and I was her caregiver, and she died about 5 years ago. I also have Huntington's and was diagnosed a few years ago, and worked as a physician and OBGYN at Kaiser, but was also involved in the ethics committee. So I had a lot of experience with a lot of the conflict that, and a lot of the just like the fear and the conflict and the things that can be problematic at the end of life that really cause problems for families or medical teams. So when my mom was deciding that she wanted to welcome a natural death, that she didn't want to have really advanced stage Huntington's, we worked with her palliative care doctors to support choosing not to treat infections and things like that so that she could welcome a natural death. But she definitely wasn't at the end of her life, but there was a lot of uncertainty around when was it going to happen that something would occur that would allow her to die. And so we really took that opportunity to try to avoid upset at the end. And so we spent a lot of years just making sure that she told all the people she loved that she loved them, and she made sure that was there anything that was left unsaid. And so we were really proactive around it because we wanted to make sure that that was all taken care of, because we didn't know when the end was going to be. And she wasn't someone who believed in an afterlife or sort of a spiritual realm beyond, but she really felt comfortable with the idea that her body was part of the natural world and that death was a natural process and that she would return to the earth. Like, that was not fearful to her, but definitely exactly what you were saying, even for somebody who doesn't have a belief in a soul and a God, she had so much comfort from taking care of love and being connected with people that it gave her a lot of peace and in terms of waiting or approaching death. And so she really welcomed it, and she welcomed her time with people while she had it. And she was also very comfortable welcoming death. But I think I so appreciate your normalizing the conversation, and you're bringing humor, but not denying the big feelings. Like, all of it goes with the territory. And so I just really appreciate you talking about it and modeling it for us.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Kay, very much. Does anyone else have a question they want to mention? I see, Daniel, your question, which I will answer, or I'll ask.
I'm actually sort of just curious, when I'm a genetic counselor giving a talk and there's other genetic counselors in the audience, I always like to kind of get their perspective. So I was just wondering if Jocelyn had anything that she wanted to add to sort of what had been said here today.
Sorry, I think my speakers, did you mention me, Mara? I feel like you
did. Yes.
Okay. My speakers are really low today. I think, I really deeply savored every moment of this talk, Shelley. So I'll join in the chorus and the cacophony that this is really, I think, a wonderful, journey to think through how we frame this process to people and families, especially those living with chronic and progressive neurological conditions. I think there's so many kinds of unique ways of experiencing the dying process. And I feel like, your talk really highlighted so many of those peculiarities and the uncertainty that exists for so many of the families I work with. I think that there's a lot in medicine in general that is a mystery to us, and often in my role as a neurologist, I get to live in there and breathe and swim in it. And often in my neurology work, I'm trying to kind of emphasize and share with people, like, this is something that we can swim in together, and that, like, come join in me in the fact that we don't understand so much about why things happen a certain way, or why they don't happen in other ways. And if we can find some beauty or generosity in that mystery, then that's a comfort. And I think that, so much of my work in neurology and palliative care kind of centers around that question of mystery. So Thank you for grounding me again and what drew me into this field, Shelley. I really appreciated it.
Thank you.
Daniela has a question. What do we do if our loved one has a pulse? Is there a little bit more, Daniela, you can share? Do you mean like?
Yeah, so after we find out about Andrew that he has HD in 2020, then somebody told me to do the documents like the trust and will and everything. And on that occasion, when Andrew could still decide, he put a post in and gave it to his. I mean, it is in his file at UC Davis and at his regular doctor. And then I'm talking with friends and family. He says, "Oh, so what if he has a post? You don't tell the doctor to, you know." to do what they are supposed to do, but this was his will. And now I'm talking with another estate planner who tells me that she cannot change his documents because now he can't make decisions anymore.
Right.
So anyway, this is hard, you know, and I wanted to mention that everybody has a soul, whether they believe in God or not, and the soul never is not sick with the HD or with any illness. The soul, it's as nice and beautiful as it was, you know, when the person was healthy. But anyway, yeah, with this pulse, I mean, for me, it would be hard to, like with the dog with the euthanasia, you know, it will be hard to follow this this directive, you know, this thing.
Daniela, you're bringing up such a good point. So the POLST is a piece of paper. It's a physician order for life-sustaining treatment. And folks who have very clear wishes about what they don't want should have a POLST. The healthcare always defaults to do everything. If a body is dead, try and get it back. If it's sick, try and get it well. That's how healthcare defaults in this state. But the POLST is allowing people the option of choice to say, maybe I want to embrace natural death. Okay, that was a beautiful way to express that. And by embracing natural death, when my time comes, and I fully expect his death to occur in sleep, Miss Daniela, do we want paramedics to try and get him back? CPR always breaks ribs. It always causes brain damage. And when I am dealing with a human that has been living in a body that has been breaking over time or having things taken away in terms of function over time, and they have gone to the extreme to say, I care so much about this, I'm going to create a POLST, I feel obligated to honor the POLST. The POLST was created with the intention of it being honored. You are correct, Daniela. If the medics don't see it, it didn't exist, and they're going to default to full measures. But then the question comes to you, sweet lady, are we honoring what he wanted? And so
so I have to honor what he wants, even though I don't. My sister-in-law, my brother had ALS, and it came, and it you know, he passed away, my brother, 5 years after he was diagnosed, very, very fast. We were very surprised, you know. And one night his lungs collapsed. He couldn't breathe anymore. And my sister-in-law did resuscitation of him. And he stayed in the hospital, and they did something at the tracheotomia is called. And he was able to live 2.5 years after that. In our religious tradition is the question of whether we are ready to die. Like if we confessed, if we there are some spiritual things, you know. So she did that, and I was talking to her about this POLST, and she goes, oh, you know, you can just ignore it and keep him in life, but yeah, so keep him in life, like if he doesn't want to be kept alive. I mean, my heart is broken anyway because I see him every day declining. Like right now, he can't take a banana off the bunch and open it and eat it. I have to do it for him. And this was not so a few months ago. I mean, little by little, he's dying a little bit every day, and my heart is broken every day. So yeah, so unfortunately, because I can't change his documents, we have to abide by them, right?
I would recommend that we abide by them, Daniela.
Okay,
Good conversation. I mean, you
all
know,
right.
it's always hard because it, you know, anyways, sometimes the interpretation, but when Kay was talking about she was on the ethics committee at Kaiser, this is some of the things that gets taken to ethics committees to talk about, you know, when should we honor wishes? When does family intervention, you know, supersede and things of that nature? But I wanted to bring this up. Someone asked a question. This person is taking care of their brother full time. He has Huntington's. He's on hospice. He's been there for 11 months. He meets all the criteria that Dr. Garoni talked about for weeks before dying. But he's a very stubborn person, which has probably served him well in his life. Actually, I know him. It has served him well. And he's still waking up. He's a little, mostly feeding himself, although not eating and drinking much at all. Should she, the sister, be waking him to make sure he gets his medication? And just, have you seen anyone stay in the state for a long period of time? Both Dr. Gurney and Dr. Jao spoke about it, but do you guys just want to mention just
Yeah.
a little bit what you said?
Yeah, just to quickly summarize, I just want to reflect back to Bonnie, who posted that comment that, many people at the end of life can really plateau in that state, in that weeks-like state. And at the end of the day, our estimations about what the future holds are pretty inaccurate. We know that from a lot of the studies we do, that doctors were pretty, we're pretty good at some things. Prognostication is not not a strength. So when you're considering medications, I'm always thinking about, what are these medications helpful with, and what's most important at this time? Given that your brother is enrolled in hospice, I might go on a limb and, make the presumption that there is at least, a focus on comfort at this time. And if the medications are helping with comfort, then they're reasonable to continue. And I also know, as a neurologist that, as someone's Huntington's disease progresses over time, so do their kind of medication needs. Those might change as well. And often as the disease progresses, often we're backing off some of the old medications that they might have been taking at higher doses for years, if not decades. So I think there's always a role to open a conversation with your hospice team to say, are these medications necessary? Is this the dose that he should be at? Do you think there's room to, make any adjustment or taper to see if they're really helping the same way they used to? I think that's always a useful exercise.
I would agree. And waking folks up to take meds, I would only do that if they're so symptomatic when they awaken that we wish, wish would have just woken them up. But if we're waking up to take a cholesterol pill, eat a cookie when you wake up, forget the cholesterol pill.
Cookies for everyone. Cookies for everyone.
Yeah, right? Cookies and chocolate.
Wow.
Or fruit flavored candies if you prefer that. Let's see. So we are at 7:33. So I guess technically we're a bit over time. I want to thank everyone for being here this evening and having this beautiful, lovely conversation with each other. You are free to reach out to me. I know how to get a hold of Jocelyn, Mara, and Shelley. So, if you need to have further conversations with any one of us, we are happy to do so. Or if you need to talk to your Huntington's team or family members, whatever it is, we're happy to help support you in any way we can. And please reach out to us. This will be available for rewatch anyways, in a couple of weeks. Give us some time. And like I said, if you have any questions or concerns, please reach out. There's lots of people here and around you that want to help support you guys through this journey. And thank you all for all of the people that have been here for all 4 parts. And I'm kind of sad that this is the end. But we'll see you guys at different other events and get to give each other hugs. So I hope you all have a very good evening, and we will see you again at a future event.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
Everyone.
Take care,
That's great.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.